Hello, hello. Good morning, and welcome to the Million Dollar Mindset. Today, we were discussing navigating inherited properties and estate sales with one of our esteemed guests and attorneys. She is out sick today, but I wanted to just jump on really quickly. I'm no attorney, but I do know that it's important to have this quick dialogue around the process of transitioning property to an heir. I believe right now, and what I'm seeing right now, what I'm experiencing is we're all getting to a certain age to where we're losing loved ones, and we are now the responsible parties for dealing with um, death and funeral arrangements and estate planning and that whole piece. And so I think it's important to have conversations around that so we can successfully go through that process. I am your host, Sanina Ellison Jones, CEO of Recharge Inc., a boutique real estate brokerage located right here in Chicago in the South Loop. We specialize in residential as well as commercial real estate. And one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation with our attorney, and we'll revisit the conversation for sure, was because I believe that we need to educate the public as well as the industry. The reality is many real estate brokers, although we specialize in many areas and aspects of real estate, are not always experts when it comes to estate sales. There's so many nuance in this process, and it's important to really kind of understand what those nuances are. I am currently navigating a few estate sales with clients who have inherited property. There was no trust, and it just really muddies the waters. The property has to go through probate, which is a very long and arduous process. And so I just wanted to have a quick conversation and to just think about what are the impacts of inherited property when it's not transferred properly. And there's a couple big ones that comes to mind. We're losing what in our community we call Big Mama's house. And so I saw this in my own family personally. When I became president of the Dearborn Realtors Board, my incoming speech, I shared a story about a home, a property that was in my family that I grew up in. And because we did not have the proper structures in place, we lost that property due to back taxes. It was owned free and clear. It was a gray stone in Hyde Park. If you know Hyde Park in Chicago, very established and wealthy community in Chicago. And we lost this property for $40,000. When I drive past it today, some investor purchased it. This was years ago, and it's still vacant. And so it breaks my heart that none of us were at the time positioned. I was young. I wasn't positioned to assist my family at that time. But most importantly, we weren't set up properly to ensure that the property remained in the family. And, one of the things that I also realized is, quite frankly, a lot of us financially are not in a position to do anything about it, right? If you don't have 40,000, you don't have $40,000. As little as that may seem, it's a lot if you don't have it. And so that's what I'd love to prevent for us who are in a position to do so. Because the reality is, I'd rather you sell it than lose it. Don't lose it to taxes. Don't just let someone take it away from you, then sell it. The property was worth $500,000 at that time. Even in dilapidated condition, it's a multi-million-dollar property. But due to the lack of knowledge, lack of investment, lack of information, and even just the distress, when you're in a distressed state, it's difficult to think through your problems. It's difficult to be rational and go and process things properly. You're acting out of emotion, you're acting out of fear. And so you make decisions that you otherwise might not have made. So one of the biggest things that I see we're losing is generational wealth. Real estate has and will continue to be the cornerstone of how wealth is built in this country. And passing that down from one generation to the next in the Black community has been challenging because of a number of different obstacles. Oftentimes, what we find is title isn't correct, right? And so, however, this property was acquired, eons and decades ago, when the generations before us acquired the property, sometimes they purchased properties on contract, right? Because there was a time when African Americans couldn't get loans to purchase property, and so when they were making these contract payments, we would assume that when they made their final payment, the property would transfer over to them. Well, oftentimes the paperwork did not transfer properly, and so they live in the home, they own it, but when they pass away, if their name isn't on the deed, now there's a problem with transferring ownership, right? So now, the heirs have problems claiming ownership to the property. The other challenge is not having, a living trust. And one of the things that I've seen that's really disheartening when someone passes away is, having the heirs fight over belongings, right? And having a living trust allows your beneficiaries to have the property transferred to them, whether that's the real estate or the furniture or the fur coat or the diamonds or whatever it is, based on your wishes, right? So now you can set up directives and create beneficiaries that state exactly, what your wishes are. Who do you want this to go to? And then that happens. And that way it's peaceful. It's a peaceful transfer and no one's fighting over it. I see in a lot of the movies when it shows, affluent families, and the those that are to be the heirs, if you have the son or the daughter who did not meet certain criteria, they don't get the benefits of the will, right? They have to do a certain thing or live a certain place or keep up the house for a certain amount of years or whatever the requirements are. You can put certain requirements, in this document to ensure that your wishes are carried out by the heirs. So they only get a certain amount of money at this point when they turn 18. If they graduate from college at 21, then they get, X amount. And then if they, take over the family's business and they get X amount, obviously there has to be those types of benefits in order for that to be set up. But the point is, even if you don't have an affluent family, you can still set up a living trust to ensure that whatever your family's assets are, they're transferred appropriately and properly and based on your wishes. Then the other thing to me is familial stability, which is huge in the Black community, Black and Brown community, especially. I see a lot in the Brown community, families that live communally, right? They live amongst each other. You have multiple families that will live together, or generations, should I say, that will live together for a number of reasons. But it helps people to get on their feet. Everybody doesn't always have the same start to life. So sometimes you have a little bit of a slower start. It's helpful to be able to live in mama's basement or grandmama's basement, but it's helpful that she has one, right? And that is huge. Oftentimes you hear college students have to come back home. There needs to be a home for them to come back to. And that's the stability of home ownership. That's what it creates in our families, a sense of safety, a sense of belonging, a sense of stability. I love that my mom's home has become that for our family, where we all know that we can go there, at any time. She has an open door policy. My children can go there. My brothers can go there. My nieces, my nephews. It's not that it's the biggest home. It's not about that. It's about the safety of community. That's what that creates, somewhere that you can go. And so I think this conversation, it extends far beyond that as well, though, because, once we're getting to this age, our 40s and 50s, we're losing our parents, we're losing our grandparents. You don't want to have to deal with this type of rational thinking when you're going through a very emotional state. At that point, it's difficult to figure. At that point, quite frankly, it's too late, right? You need to have done this before the owner has passed away, right? And so this is the planning that, in our community, we often skip over: having the proper insurance policy and coverage, having a living trust. These are things that literally can set us up or set up the next generation and ensure that we're not constantly starting over as a community. This is how wealth is transferred on death. So I just think there's so much opportunity for us to learn more, even as real estate professionals. And so what we will go into the next time when I have the attorney on here, we're going to go into the legal framework. We're going to answer questions like, what should a real estate broker know about the probate process and how it affects the property sale? As the executor of the estate, what can you do? What are your rights? What are your responsibilities? Helping our clients to understand that process. What are some of the common legal pitfalls that brokers should watch out for when listing or selling an inherited property? I've had a few very interesting situations where there's multiple heirs and they're not on the same page. That can be challenging, right? And so understanding the role that the heirs play, who has control, is it shared? I think they had two of the heirs had to buy out the third one because he was not in agreement with the process. And so it can get very testy. It's not always smooth. Rarely is it smooth, because there's a lot of emotion, contempt, resentment. There's a lot of stuff that comes up when you're dealing with transitioning inherited property. And so you got to be really able to manage a delicate situation. You want to get to the business of the business, but you're really almost operating in the therapeutic space as well. And so you got to be very delicate in managing these matters. And then, working with the heirs. So how can brokers help families navigate disagreement amongst heirs about selling the property? Property value. How are you assessing the property's value? Obviously, this isn't a rehab property. This property has probably been in their family for many, many years. It may be a home that they grew up in, that their mom still owns. What do you do with the items in the property? That's not necessarily your decision to make. It's usually going to be that of the heirs. But if there's no document, there's no living trust and will that really spells out who gets what. And most times, as mom, you're not necessarily saying this person's going to get the lamp and this person's going to get the table, right? And so those things are kind of up for grabs, and that can be challenging, right? And so I try to stay out of that part, let them iron that out, but then also give them a deadline by which we need to have determined this. I'm actually working with 3 estate sales concurrently right now. Each one is completely different. And so it's just the delicate process, and I try to operate in that space with respect for the deceased as well as for the heirs. But having that attorney is imperative, because I'm not the expert in this space. I'm still becoming an expert in this space. I know more now than I did before, but there's a lot of nuance and dealing with, probate, dealing with that process, dealing with the state. There's just a lot of nuance here. And before they can even sell the property, making sure that, they're taking title properly so that they can transfer. They have the authority to do it. A couple other things that we'll talk about. Are there any specific legal documentation that the broker should be aware of? Talking about some common mistakes to avoid. And then just making sure that we have our brokers educated, as well as the public educated on the property in general, tax implications, for the heirs. If there's multiple properties, just it's a lot of detail. And so that's what we really want to go over. So I just wanted to touch on, to me, it's important that we have this conversation because we're losing wealth throughout this process by not transferring wealth properly, by not transferring the assets properly. I think there's a huge opportunity to be educated when it comes to generational wealth, as opposed to just letting the property go. there's an opportunity, right, to, at least get it sold and get it into the hands of someone who is going to take good care of it, possibly even rehabbing the property, and getting it back into habitable condition. I have another client, their property is virtually just dilapidating and rotting away. It's not in habitable condition right now. There's back taxes on it. No one has been the responsible party for many, many years. And, it becomes a sad situation when it's not handled with care. So I would love to help educate the audience on how we can create a process for ourselves for something that may be potentially coming down the pike, so that when this does come, we can transition our loved ones' assets with care. So that's all I have for today. I just wanted to thank you all so much for just kind of jumping in. I'm so disappointed that our special guest couldn't be with us today, but there's a bug going on and she's sick. So we will have her with us next time. You can subscribe to our million dollar mindset call by joining our monthly membership program, which gives you access to these calls as well as more, and more expert advice on real estate planning, as well as navigating complex real estate situations. I consider myself to be a real estate strategist. People bring me their problems and I solve them. Until next time, my name is Nina Ellison Jones. Thank you so much for joining us, and I will see you next time. Bye.